Good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. My name is Pat Murphy, and I'm coming to you from, I suppose, a not so sunny southeast. Um, Glad to have you with us this morning. Since we began work on the Teagasc Max, the greenhouse gas max, one of the issues that has been pretty controversial has been the whole area around the impact of animal health on our emissions. I'm delighted to welcome Lance Woods this morning. And Lance has undertaken a Nuffield scholarship over the last couple of years from 21 to 23, where he took on a project to look at the impact of animal health on our climate change targets and our climate emissions. Lance, you're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Pat, and delighted to be here and for the opportunity to present to on a Signpost webinar. So thank you.
You might just give us a little bit of your background. You've been involved for quite a while, I think, in the animal health area, working with MSD, and I think involved for the last 14 years in that
Yeah,
area.
so I've been in the animal health industry for the last 14 years. So I suppose an industry that I really enjoy and I get a lot back from it. And I suppose the animal health industry has been very good to me and I'm very passionate about that area. I'm a graduate of UCD, graduating back in 2007 from agricultural science in UCD or animal science. And yeah, I've basically been my whole career in animal health. And as you suggested, Pat, more recently completed my Nuffield scholarship.
And what prompted you to look at this issue of emissions and animal health?
Yeah, so I suppose maybe I felt maybe, Pat, that it wasn't in the conversation enough or we weren't discussing it enough. And obviously it came from a strong animal health background and had that network there. And I felt maybe that we weren't talking about that enough and the impact, the positive impact that it can have in achieving in our goals, particularly in Ireland, and the positive impact it may have or could have.
Okay. I'm also delighted to welcome Méabh O'Hagan today. Good morning, Méabh.
Good morning, Pat. How are things?
Méabh will be helping us with questions afterwards. So just to remind you to put your questions into the Q&A, and Lance, if you're ready to start presenting there, we'll proceed with the presentation.
Right. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Pat, and thanks again for the invitation to speak to you today. This webinar series is something I've personally followed, so I suppose it's actually great to be part of one. So as Pat already introduced, my name is Lance Woods, and I'm currently the ruminant marketing manager for MSD Animal Health. And recently, I've had the privilege of completing my Nuffield farming scholarship through Nuffield Ireland. So I suppose having grown up in agriculture and been immersed in agriculture from a very young age, it was inevitable that my research project was going to relate to animal health, an area I'm incredibly passionate about. So Ireland has very ambitious commitments. So Ireland's committed to reduce emissions in agriculture by an ambitious 25% by 2030. And I'm deeply convinced animal health has an integral part to play in these targets. So after much deliberation and being around the houses, I eventually came up with the title of my research project, and it's how can animal health positively impact our climate change targets? So just a little bit more about who Lance Woods is. One slide. I grew up in Northwest Cavan on a small pedigree cattle and sheep farm, and I made the big move and emigrated to Northwest Cavan to Coothill. And I now live there with my wife Grace and 3 young kids, and we still have a small piece of land there, so we still have the sheep. And as I said before, I grew up immersed in agriculture, and that resulted in me studying agricultural science in UCD, specialising in animal science. And as I've already discussed with Pat, I spent the last 14 years in the animal health industry. I gained my NOAA certificate in animal health from Harper Adams in 2015, and I graduated from my MBA or my Master's in Business Administration in 2018 from DCU. But perhaps one of the most fulfilling things I've done in my career to date is my Nuffield scholarship, which I completed from 2021 to 2023. And finally, I currently work for MSD Animal Health as the ruminant marketing manager. So I lead our marketing efforts across our biopharma and technology solutions business. So the people close to me call me nosy, but I prefer the word curious. So I've always been curious to learn more, and that was the beauty of completing a Nuffield, as it gave me the license to be curious, to question, and to understand. And as the famous Steve Jobs quote states, there's always one more thing to learn. So I've got a few slides on Nuffield, just in case you're not familiar with Nuffield. So what is it? So a Nuffield Farming Scholarship is a travel and study bursary awarded by the Nuffield Farming Scholarship Trust. And in this case, that was Nuffield Ireland for me. The objective of the award is, the scheme is to encourage the advancement of agriculture and rural development through the promotion of awareness, education and leadership in the Irish agriculture and particularly rural sectors. And Nuffield Ireland develop leaders who will shape the future of agriculture with local and global communities. So you become a member of Nuffield Ireland to promote agriculture and agriculturally related issues. You become a member of a worldwide network of more than 1,700 Nuffield scholars, and you get to enjoy that Nuffield experience and that Nuffield network. And Nuffield scholars often go on to achieve great things, sought after speakers, or leading community groups at home and abroad. And Nuffield Ireland is a member country of Nuffield International, the global body. So what's entailed? International travel for a minimum of 11 weeks, an 18-month period. So you need to commit to that travel period. And then once per year, Nuffield International hosts an annual Contemporary Scholars Conference. And in my case, that was in London and Norwich in GB. So the CSC is a week-long programme for newly selected scholars held in a member country and rotated between the Northern and Southern Hemisphere. This annual event, I suppose, is to start off, the blast off, the kickoff of each new Nuffield scholar. The entire group gathers together for one time only, spending 8 days exploring agriculture in the host country, learning more about themselves and each other, and engaging with leaders in agriculture who help reinforce the Nuffield vision and values. And I suppose the biggest piece of the Nuffield journey is the Global Focus Programme. And that's an opportunity for all new Irish and international scholars to participate in a 6-week intensive travel programme. Small groups of 8 to 12 scholars from a variety of backgrounds travel to around 5 to 7 countries and experience a broad range of agricultural systems. And I suppose you're experiencing that very different political and social environment and the variation in agriculture between countries. And the GFP aims to develop scholars' understanding of global agriculture, broaden their horizons, and give them the opportunity to meet with progressive businesses, organisations, and governments. There's other factors involved. You're meeting people from all around the world. There's a responsibility to write the report up. You present at the Nuffield Ireland conference, but also to stay involved and to work in that network and alumni in the future. And I suppose for me, a few take-home messages. I've challenged myself with new points of view, complete my Nuffield, and I've been out of my comfort zone on numerous occasions. And I suppose Nuffield has taught me how, not know. And what I come to appreciate is whether we're visiting another country or talking to a person from another country, it's a different flag, it's a different country, but it just means different challenges. So what I come to appreciate from meeting people from different agricultural background and from different countries all across the world, we all have challenges. And maybe I had the habit of being blinkered to perhaps just Ireland, but as we know, and as I have come to appreciate, the world is a big place. There's a Maori quote, it's all about the people, and Nuffield is no different. It's all about the people, and that's what makes it special. From a dairy vet in Australia to a beef farmer in Japan, the variation is vast. So it's been an incredible journey. In the next few slides, just quickly go around the world as to where I've been. I've visited 11 countries and I've had considerable online meetings with people and organisations from Australia, New Zealand, Japan and Chile, particularly relating to my topic of how animal health can reduce emissions. In my own GFP group, there were 7 different nationalities: English, Australian, Japanese, Canadian, a Kiwi and a Zimbabwean. So it kicked off in Singapore. And Singapore was interesting in the fact that they import 90% or 95% of their food. But there's a real drive there to become more sustainable, and they have ambitious plans to produce 30% of their food by 2030 in their own country. India was a tale of two halves, fascinating country. Agriculture is fascinating. So we visited southern India, and much more underdeveloped, small tea, coffee, cardamom, banana growers, very rural, I suppose, very innocent. Then northern India, much more developed when it comes to agriculture, and huge efforts to reduce methane emissions from burning scrub after growing rice, which is a huge mindset change and a huge habit change for Indian farmers. And when it comes to dairy, I suppose it's interesting to note India is #1 in the world when it comes to number of cows. However, the average herd size is 1.2 cows. And there's some real positive development and momentum in the dairy industry with the rise of the co-op model in India, particularly driven by female farmers. And I was surprised that the research India were doing to reduce emissions in ruminants. We visited Qatar, where we visited a 25,000 cow farm, and it had an on-site dairy processing and a very technology advanced farm and farming in the desert. I visited Israel in more peaceful times, where I seen a fascinating high producing dairy industry, and 90% of cows in Israel were behavior monitoring technology. I visited Greece, where there's a real opportunity for development and education around agriculture to improve their farming methods. In Germany, I witnessed innovative, creative, large-scale farming. The stark difference between East and West is still very evident, and it was interesting to see how the Germans are dealing with their environmental challenges. I visited the Netherlands on a few occasions, and they consistently impressed me of how innovative they are at farm level. And not forgetting closer to home, I had extensive meetings throughout GB, NI, and Ireland around what we're doing to reduce emissions at farm level. And finally, my trips finished in Canada and the US. I visited Washington and the USA to gain a better understanding of lobbying, policy, market access, and visited agricultural systems in Pennsylvania. And I suppose my main take-home message from the US was, whilst they're focused on sustainability, they're not willing to neglect production. And they are looking at Europe, and they're looking at the bureaucracy, and they're looking at the red tape, where they're just driving production on. So that's my journey. So to give a little bit of context before I move into my actual research topic, in 2021, the European Commission research tells us that climate change was the #1 concern for humanity. Not antimicrobial resistance, not food security. Climate change is a main concern. And perhaps so it should be. Perhaps there's scaremongering, perhaps there's exaggeration, but I think I'm convinced that climate change is real. And this is just some news reports from recent weeks and months to suggest the seriousness of climate change. So I suppose we all have a responsibility to address that. And if we look at environment and social governments, 45% of people, 45% of Gen Z are boycotting brands with poor ESG credentials. 51% of millennials will not work for companies they see as unethical. And 70% of investors are divesting from companies with a pure ESG score. So the consumer is following what's happening in this area. Something I reflect on is that responsibility across the supply chain. And when I talk about emissions, this also represents farm gate price, etc. So does an unfair share of the responsibility fall with the farmer? Those value change pressures should be across the supply chain, from the retailer to the distributor, right across the supply chain. And perhaps too much of an onus is falling on the farmer in a lot of different factors. So back closer to home, and something I consistently referred to during my studies and research was the Teagasc Signpost 12 steps to reduce emissions on farm. And animal health is in there. And for the focus of the remainder of this presentation, I will focus on how animal health can reduce emissions. And Pat referred to, asked the question, what motivated me to look at this certain topic? And I felt maybe that it wasn't something that we were discussing enough, just to bring it onto the agenda and see how it can have an impact. So if we look at Ireland and emissions, agriculture contributes 37% of the total greenhouse gas emitted. And I suppose this is a fact we have to accept. We may argue how it's measured, but that's the figure that's out there. Greenhouse gas emissions in Irish farms come primarily from methane belched from cattle and sheep, fertilizer use, animal excrement, and diesel. So I suppose I call this my myth-busting slide. So while CO2 is released mostly from burning fossil fuels for agriculture, the main greenhouse gases are methane, which contribute around 65%, and nitrous oxide, which contributes around 30%. So why does lifespan matter? So I suppose lifespan matters when measuring how gas warms up a planet. Up to this point, we've been looking at CO2 equivalent of each gas and how it warms the planet. But if we go back to methane, methane isn't going to significantly warm the planet for 100 years, only 12. And biogenic methane that's the methane that's in that 12-year cycle. The carbon in biogenic methane is a new and additional carbon to our atmosphere because it's derived from atmospheric CO2, and that's it, that'll be oxidized in approximately 12 years. So maybe methane isn't that big bad guy it's made out to be. And contrary to common belief, only a small percentage of methane is produced in the cow's large intestine and then expelled. And this was something that if I was talking to, a person that was related to non-agriculture, it was always thought it was the fart, but it's actually the burps. And this diagram, courtesy of Global Food Justice Alliance, explains how cattle emissions are cycled while fossil fuels are added. So the new carbon is added in the left, but existing carbon is cycled in the cow's carbon cycle. And this is something Frank Mittelheiner from UC Davis continuously refers to the above graph. And if we look at an IPC report from 2023, if we look at carbon emissions by sector, energy obviously is the biggest culprit. So I do sometimes think that farmers are unfairly targeted to reduce emissions, because obviously we need to make huge strides towards that energy piece as well. So how can animal health positively impact our climate change targets, or in simple terms, how can animal health reduce emissions? Now, I could talk about this for hours, but I've picked 3 of my main findings. So the power of prevention, meaning a robust vaccination or herd health plan, or a prevention plan, in what of a better description. How animal health ag tech can improve efficiencies on farm, and a novel concept of reduction at source. So it's simple in my head, and this is what I learned after studying for 2 years. If we have healthier animals, we have lower carbon footprint. Jonathan Statham, who I worked with throughout my research, a practicing vet in Yorkshire and also chief executive of RAF Solutions, a research body based in GB. And Jonathan has completed extensive research in the area of the impact of disease on emissions. So it's preventing that disease from happening in the first place, therefore reducing the emissions. And if we look at the graph on screen, it illustrates the impact disease can have on a farm with the increase in greenhouse gas emissions per 1,000 litres of milk produced. So for example, we see the graph, an outbreak of salmonella can have up to 19% increase on emissions. This is through significant decrease in milk yield, abortions, infertility, pneumonia, and inefficiencies on the farm of those performing animals. On BVD, Irish farmers and Animal Health Ireland have completed some great work in reducing BVD on farm with the BVD eradication programme. But if we move on to infertility, it can increase emissions on farm by 16% if we're sitting on those dormant cows. An IBR outbreak can lead to an increase of 8%, and lameness can increase emissions on farm by 7%. So as a nation, we have an okay vaccination in certain areas like IBR, for example. Other areas there is opportunity. We need to identify the diseases that have the greatest negative impact on Irish farms. And a study from the Health for Animals states that a 40% global vaccination rate for cattle in a given year is associated with 5% reduction in land required for livestock production, reducing the environmental footprint of livestock systems. So it's a win-win. So if we look at the disease increases greenhouse gas emissions on livestock production. So animals that are sick consume more feed and water. Their food conversion efficiency drops. while growing at a slower rate. When an animal is lost to disease, it means resources must be reinvested in raising another animal to meet market demand. This means disease leads to higher greenhouse gas levels per unit of milk, meat, and eggs, because more animals and resources are ultimately needed to maintain that same level of productivity. So if we have a sick animal, that results in a lower yield, therefore we need more animals, resulting in higher emissions. And also something that I came across on numerous occasions is parasite control is very significant when it comes to emissions. A study by Fox et al. Suggests parasites can increase methane emissions by 33% in an animal, which is why other studies have found deworming can drastically cut emissions. So the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations have completed extensive work in impact of disease and production. So 20%, and this is an FAO work, 20% of global animal protein is lost due to disease. So a staggering amount of possible animal protein is lost due to disease outbreak. So healthier animals are more productive and generate lower emissions per weight of product. Improving animal health and well-being reduces emissions and mortality and product waste, improving product productivity and fertility. Fewer animals are then needed to meet demands and therefore reducing that emission output on that farm. According to the All-Ireland Disease Surveillance Report in 2022, over 50% mortality in calves in 1 to 5 month old age bracket is down to diarrhea, BRD, and Clostridia. These 3 disease areas have vaccine readily available, and these diseases can be greatly reduced on farm with effective vaccination. And for the purposes of this presentation, I'll move on now to animal health agricultural technology, and I'll focus on just 3 animal health technologies. So the first one being ZELP. ZELP is zero emissions livestock project, is committed to eliminating emissions while taking care of our planet. My first encounter with Francisco Norris was at the Animal Health Ag Tech Innovation Summit in Amsterdam in October 22. Francisco, having fond memories of growing up in agriculture, he grew up in a sustainable grazing Aberdeen Angus farm in Argentina. There's not much he doesn't know about emissions. So how does ZELP work? The cow gets a new harness or mask. The device fits comfortably around the cow's head. There's no change to feeding, rumination, or interaction with the herd, and their studies show that. The gas is captured and oxidized, and as the cattle exhales, belching through the nose, the methane travels through a catalyst where it's oxidized, then released into the air as CO2 and water vapor. Also, a clever add-on of the technology precisely tracks methane reduction and key data for farmers. A few months ago, the Gates Foundation awarded 4.8 or close to $5 million to ZELP to develop further. And I suppose if I came across ZELP a few years ago, I'd be, no, that'll never take off. However, if Nuffield has taught me anything, it's taught me to embrace blue sky thinking and respect other points of view and opinions. Moving on, I came across the Hanskamp cow toilet in the Netherlands. Yes, you heard me right, a cow toilet. This dramatically reduces ammonia emissions by separating manure and urine. Cow walks into the stall and is stimulated to urinate, and the urine is collected. So basically, you're separating the urine and the excrement. So pure urine can then be used for precision fertilization. And of course, there's the tried and tested SenseHub behavior monitoring technology, which will reduce emissions by providing the farmer with herd insights on fertility and health. And SenseHub has been proven to reduce emissions on farm by 8% per litre of energy corrected milk produced. With SenseHub, dairy farmers can make data-driven decisions for maximised productivity. And watch this space. SenseHub ecosystem is developing further, having recently launched milk monitoring technology with SenseHub somatic cell count sensors and SenseHub inline milk plus sensors launched on the Irish market. So if we look at vaccines to reduce methane, and the Kiwis have done a lot of work on this, given the importance of agriculture in their country. So they're working hard on developing a vaccine that reduces methane emissions from ruminant livestock. So everything I've spoke up until now prevents that emissions happening, but this is actually a reduction at source. So a successful methane vaccine would trigger an animal's immune response and trigger an animal immune response system to generate antibodies in that animal's saliva, suppress the growth and function of methane producing microbes, or we call them methanogens, to reduce those methanogens in the rumen. A vaccine is a highly desirable tool if proven efficacious for reducing methane emissions because it requires no farm system changes, is used infrequently, leaves no residues in products, and is applicable to all ruminants, farm animals. So we can see here in the picture how it actually works. And on reduction at source, it's worth mentioning ruminant biotech's CAM bolus. They plan to have this bolus commercially available by 2025 and are claiming it will reduce methane emissions by 70%. And of course, extensive research has also been completed by Teagasc using feed additives to reduce emissions. So there's a silver bullet, but unfortunately there is none here. So from my extensive travels, I can conclude any product that reduces emissions also needs to increase productivity. And that's the challenge. Global experts suggest managing livestock methane can be part of the climate change solution. For my conclusions, the power of prevention, meaning a robust vaccination or herd health plan, how animal health, ag tech can improve efficiencies on farm, and a novel concept of reduction at source. The data is clear. Better animal health means higher productivity, lower emissions, and fewer people going hungry. Healthy animals are a cornerstone of sustainable food systems. I think it's sometimes easy to forget the great job Irish farmers do every day. The Irish dairy industry is one of the lowest carbon footprints in the world, as is our beef. So whilst we're also striving to be better, sometimes we have to take a step back and admire our agricultural systems and our Irish farmers of the great job they do every day. So my recommendations, we need to continue to embrace existing tools. I suppose the temptation is to be always looking for something new and shining. And when I traveled the world, I was proud to represent Irish agriculture on how far we've come in our efforts to reduce emissions on Irish farms. But as the saying goes, a lot done, more to do. And the FAO estimate that increased uptake of existing animal health and existing animal health and husbandry technologies and practices can reduce livestock emissions intensity anywhere between 18 and 30%. My second recommendation is knowledge transfer. So I think there's further education and awareness is required at farm level as to how animal health can reduce emissions. We hear a lot of talk of certain topics, and that was the objective of my study, was to bring animal health into that discussion and conversation as to how it can have a positive impact. We have to work out why the rates of adoption of ag technology and vaccines are where they are. And I look at my Indian example on this. Maybe it's hard for an Irish farmer that's been doing the way he's been doing things for 20 years to move to a new technology. And that's a huge mindset change and behavioral change. Where if you're starting up a new farm in India, it's much easier from a greenfield site to maybe embrace that technology from day one, just a thought. And finally, further research is required at reduction at source in an Irish context. So I presented my findings last November, and I was honoured to receive the Pádraig Walsh Award for the best presentation on the day at the Nuffield Ireland conference, voted by the attendees on the day, and I was privileged to receive the award in memory of such a powerful legacy of Irish agricultural leadership. Pádraig Walsh was one of the first founding Nuffield scholars and really drove Nuffield as to where it is today. And the obligatory thank you slide. Thank you to Nuffield scholarship investors, who without this programme wouldn't be possible, and we wouldn't get this reward and experience. I'd like to thank Nuffield Ireland for the opportunity, and to Joe and Catherine for all their support and guidance along the journey. And thank you to MSD Animal Health for not only their unwavering support throughout the process, but the encouragement to maximise the opportunity. Thank you to the Nuffield community. And finally, thank you for listening. I have one plug, and it's around recruitment of Nuffield scholars. So the recruitment process is now open, and they're open till the end of August. So please go to the website for further information. My very last slide, and I'm going to leave you with some thought-provoking facts around emissions. So Poor and Nemeshik, in their 2018 study, Reducing Food's Environmental Impacts Through Producers and Consumers, states a chocolate bar from the deforested rainforest emits more than a serving of low-impact beef. And another interesting fact, fashion accounts for up to 10% of global carbon dioxide output, more than any international flights and shipping combined, according to the United Nations Environmental Programme. Yet many people want to blame necessary, sustainable food production. Once again, thank you for listening. I'll stop sharing and I'll hand it back to Pat.
Thanks very much for really interesting and thought-provoking look at animal health and a lot of other factors as well. So a couple of questions spring to mind, and I don't know if I just remind people to use the Q&A to put in their questions. One thing that springs to mind is the potential impact of climate change on the diseases and the disease pressure that we have, and are we likely to see changes and potential increases in that over the years as a result of climate change, which will add to the challenge.
Yeah, so just break that down again, Pat, in the sense of...
So given that we're seeing a degree of climate change, are we likely in this country to see increased pressure from new diseases, which will, I suppose, make the challenge even bigger to make sure that we are achieving the levels of performance that we can and the level of control of diseases?
Yeah, I think, well, if you break that down very simply, of the vaccines that are available, we still have relatively low penetration rates in Ireland. So if you take BRD and young stock, vaccination rates are maybe 30-40%. So there's still huge potential to utilize the tools that we have. New disease areas, there's always going to be a threat, I suppose, of new disease areas, and that's happening all around the world, and there's no reason as to why that wouldn't come to Ireland. But I think maybe sometimes we have to take a step back and utilize what we already have to use to our best, to use that in our toolbox to combat what's there already. Okay.
And I suppose just over the last number of years, everybody got to know a lot about vaccines and the development of vaccines and the speed at which it can be done at if we have a crisis. Is, in your view, enough effort being put into, I suppose, the development of effective vaccines for animal production at the moment, or is there scope for more work in the area and more investment?
Yeah, look, I think there's always opportunity to develop more. MSD just launched a product, Bovis Cryptium, for Cryptosporidia, and that's something that is completely novel and completely new because there is no vaccine available for that. I suppose the challenge with vaccine research is that particular product that we've just launched is it's 23 years in the process. So whilst we turned the COVID vaccine around pretty quickly, it's much more challenging and it takes time to develop that vaccine. But we recognized, obviously, 23 years ago that Cryptosporidia was a huge challenge to European farmers, and we're delighted just to bring that to market now. So as a company, and to speak on behalf of MSD, we put the largest research kitty or the largest research investment into ruminant. So we're constantly researching and developing new vaccines for disease areas and trying to, I suppose, crystal ball, okay, what is that next disease, or what could that be the next disease threat? But it goes back to my previous comments is why not utilize what we have? And I think it comes back to the technologies as well. Sometimes it's always like you're always attracted to the new shiny thing, whereas we've got tools there that can help us.
And you mentioned the potential for a vaccine to work on methane production in the room, and I know the New Zealanders have done some work on that. But is there much interest in that in the commercial world, or is it just purely in research or in public research organizations?
Yeah, so I think I think the Kiwis are fairly well on that journey, but yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that if you launched a vaccine to reduce methane, who would actually pay for that vaccine? Because if the farmer's not getting a productivity or an efficiency increase, I'm sure if I was a farmer, I'd struggle to invest in that. So is it something the processors will get involved in, the stakeholders get involved in, to basically, I suppose, achieve that net zero or achieve sustainability credentials? The beauty of it is, as I said, it's a nice concept, as in it doesn't disrupt anything. It's a vaccine. You give it, it works. It reduces the methanogens in the rumen. So I suppose, Pat, it's a watch this space case. Maybe do government get involved in that? So it'll be an interesting one to watch in New Zealand, as it develops, and how they'll, I suppose, get it into cows or get their route to market. Pat's frozen. Is he?
Yeah, I think we might have just lost Pat briefly there. So look, I have a couple of questions there for you as well, Lance, just until we get
Yeah.
Pat back. I suppose, coming back to kind of like what you were saying in terms of the how it's kind of a no-brainer nearly when you look at the impact of vaccinations from an environmental point of view. But I suppose if we were to take a farm profitability point of view as well, you'd say that it is a bit of a no-brainer for, when you look at the figures. I suppose my question then is, working as a signpost advisor on the ground where you're rolling out those 12 steps to farmers, like what do you think we can do kind of from a knowledge transfer point of view, I suppose, to kind of increase that adoption? It does seem like a no-brainer. So why do you think we haven't maybe got that level of adoption of the vaccines that are available?
Yeah, and that's something I would have looked at throughout my studies, and I've looked at behavior change and BCOM models and the Rogers assessment curve of change. I think it's changing mindset, and that's a challenge, or it's changing that behavior. And maybe in some occasions it's a case of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But that still doesn't prevent you having an outbreak of, PI3 or RSV. But I think simply sometimes it just come back, Maeve, to an education and awareness piece of, okay, this is what a vaccine can do for you on farm. This is the productivity gains. These are the efficiencies that you'll gain from it. And it's simplifying it all. Sometimes I think it can be a minefield of, okay, there's this vaccine, there's that vaccine. It's simplifying for the farmer, and every farm is different. So it's simplifying it for the farmer. Okay, this is my vaccination plan. This is my herd health plan, and that they stick to that. And I think, people that start vaccinating, they tend to stick with it because they can see the positive impact that it can have. But to answer your question, I think it's back just to education and awareness, bringing it up in that discussion, and making farmers aware that there's the vaccines that are there are available, and they work very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it has to be taken on a farm by farm basis as well. Like,
Sure.
the
Yeah,
risks of the different diseases is going to depend from farm to farm. So it's really important,
yeah.
I suppose, that they're having that consultation with their vet or advisor,
Yeah, and
whoever it might be.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's really important as well. As in, there's no person than the veterinary practitioner that's working with that farm. Like, they know that farm, and they'll be able to advise on that vaccination plan. So it's really important, I think, to work with your vet, to come up with a herd health plan or a vaccination plan that's applicable for your farm.
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose a question that's come in there from the audience as well is, again, it's an issue that we come across a good bit on the ground as well, is this whole thing of kind of total emissions versus carbon footprint. And, how do you make sure that the two things are kind of pulling in the one direction? You talked about how when you have healthier animals, you can achieve the same performance or output from a smaller number of animals, and there's less land required then. But how do you avoid that becoming maybe a vicious cycle of there's less animals required for more output, so then there's more animals actually brought in for that higher output? And what would your thoughts be on that?
Yeah, and I suppose you have the intensification topic in there as well. But I suppose I have a very simple brain, but in simple terms, if your animals are performing better, you need less animals to get the same produce.
Yeah.
But I take the point that, you know, intensification comes into the topic as well. But ultimately, healthier animals will perform better for you, and then as a result, maybe less land requirement, and yeah, less intensification as well.
Yeah. So I suppose it is important that we're not kind of losing sight of the fact that we need to get the total emissions down as well as
Yeah,
just the carbon footprint too.
yeah. It's a double-edged sword, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there was another question there just in terms of kind of the measurement of methane emissions and the difference between residual methane emissions and how that's measured versus kind of total methane emissions. Um, and I suppose just discussing methane measurement in general, like you were talking about there, the lifespan of it and how does that impact our targets too?
Yeah, and I think that's look at measurement and can be quite a contentious topic. And I think if you look at different countries, there's different theories, there's different opinions. So it can be quite a fractious conversation sometimes. Somebody I've consistently referred to in the Signpost program, had him on a few weeks ago, was Frank Mittelheiner. And I kind of always took guidance from Frank's presentations and conversations. So I think it is a very opinionated, but I think if we compare apples with apples, I think it's fair, but I think it is very important that we compare, you know, like for like, that everybody's judged fairly or measured fairly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, exactly like that slide that you had up, the difference in the lifespan of the different emissions is important to bear in mind.
Yeah,
But then I suppose remembering that regardless of whether it's methane over 12 years or over 100 years, our targets remain the same. It's a 25% reduction regardless of how long the methane is circulating in the cycle.
just trying to figure out a right way around it, Maeve. I know, yeah, you're right. You're right. It's we've got the target, we have to achieve it. But I think sometimes it's no harm to bring that up just to trash it out and discuss it. And I suppose almost thought provoke people into thinking about that.
Absolutely, and how that's maybe going to be bore in mind for future targets that might be set for the sector as well,
Yeah,
hopefully.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
no.
And then just another question here as well that came in terms of, your opinion as a Nuffield scholar. What's the best way to get to adopt new technologies? The 2030 and 2050 targets aren't that far away. How are we going to encourage that adoption of, you know, new technologies? And I suppose there's existing technologies that we're still struggling to get adopted. So how are we
Yeah.
going to how are we going to promote that adoption of the new technologies that are
Yeah.
available?
I think if I was to be reincarnated, I'd come back and study psychology. As in, I'd love to study psychology in college and understand that. I think as humans, we're very complex people, aren't we? But I think that it's back to basic stuff, as in true education and awareness. If you show, you know, most reasonable people the facts and the figures, that they'll run with it. But it's basically it's education and awareness. But it's also reminding people, okay, these tools are there, whether it be an agricultural technology, whether it be a preventative measure. Sometimes it comes back to my comment of you're in your own little bubble, and maybe you're not looking outwards for those solutions. So it's just bringing those solutions into the conversation and on topic that we discuss them and trash them out and see what would work on that farm.
Yeah, exactly. And then I suppose then what would you, looking at the Irish agricultural sector as a whole, then what would you envisage as being the biggest challenge facing farmers from an animal health point of view?
Um, Look, there's constant disease challenge. There's the increasing disease prevalence. And Ireland has to contend with a lot of different disease areas. You've BRD and young stock. You've Johne's disease. You've diarrhea. You've clostridial diseases. So there is quite a lot to contend with. But I think if you can possibly prevent as much as you possibly can from entering your farm gate, you're in a much better situation. So it's about eliminating that risk that can come onto your farm. But look, there's loads of challenges out there for animal health on every farm. You know, so it's about just reducing the risk of it coming onto your farm in the first place.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier on as well as one of the, like, you know, you're talking about how climate change is one of the biggest concerns for people, but you also mentioned antimicrobial resistance, and it just kind of brought into my mind that issue around anthelmintic resistance. That's a huge challenge on Irish farms as well. And how do you think that's going to maybe affect us going forward? You know, the emissions there from fluke affected animals seemed pretty stark.
Yeah, so I suppose there's two different topics in there. If we talk about the AMR piece first, ultimately, if we increase vaccine penetration, we're going to reduce the requirement of antibiotic usage. So again, it's about prevention. That if we prevent, we're not going to have to cure, and therefore you're not using antibiotics. And there's been huge strides forward to reduce antibiotic usage on Irish farms, and I think that's on a positive trajectory. So that's AMR, but AMR is still a huge issue, and I think agriculture is playing its part in reducing that. But I think, you know, obviously the One Health piece comes into that as well, and that we need to open up communication between, you know, more animal health and human health. And UCD recently launched an initiative around One Health, which I was involved with, about getting those people to talk together of how human health can work with animal health more, and therefore having a positive impact on AMR, reducing AMR. Anti-parasitic resistance, yeah, obviously it is a real challenge as well, and I think there's still more opportunity there to, you know, do those fecal egg counts, see exactly what the issue is on farm. It's not a field that I'm a massive expert on, is anti-parasitic, or, you know, that resistance, but I think that will be a challenge moving forward, and we're going to have to get back to maybe older methods of, you know, using different strategies of grazing and measuring and taking into account, okay, what are we dealing with here, and treating that adequately or working with it. I think there has been huge improvements in that area as well. I think there's more education and awareness around dealing with parasites on farm, but maybe still more opportunity to improve on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to what you said there about going to kind of old methods of grazing and stuff, but, you know, even the research that's done into multi-species swards and you know, the effect that can have on parasite burdens and stuff like that, you know, sometimes the things that were being done, whatever, 50 or 100 years ago, they were being
Exactly.
done
Yeah.
for a reason. And
Yeah. What's to say we'll come up with the new solutions? Do you know what I mean? If you refer back to that, and that, yeah, there's opportunity there. But you're right. Yeah, what they were doing it for a reason, weren't they, Méabh? Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So look, it's great to kind of, you know, go back to that way and have the information behind the benefits associated with it too, and to kind of to learn from that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lance, again, apologies, my internet has gone down, so I'm joining on the mobile. So apologies there. Just I suppose is it a challenge for us in that we're kind of a minority in having grazing systems or predominant grazing systems in our in production, where maybe a lot of the research is and some of the solutions you pointed out seem to apply much more to I suppose indoor systems of production. Is it something that's going to, I suppose, put us at a disadvantage into the future?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and it's something that we need to talk about more on a global scale. As in, you know, when I speak to my global colleagues, like they just can't get their head around that we calve so many cows in January, February, March. Like it is alien to them, and obviously, yeah, us and the Kiwis, you know, we are a unique system in the world, and as many times as you tell your European colleagues, they still really struggle to understand our seasonality. But look, we do that for our own advantages and our own, I suppose, systems. But maybe we are, yeah, because we're in a minority, maybe that is a disadvantage. There's research going on everywhere in the sense that, you know, I suppose if you launch a vaccine that's appropriate for an indoor system versus a system of grass, and the research will be done to suit both systems or any system.
Okay, and I suppose just in terms of and I suppose Maeve kind of alluded to it. Are there areas we can do better, in your view? You're meeting farmers on a regular basis. You're at events around. Are there, as organizations supporting farmers, is there more we can be doing? Are there areas we should be prioritizing? I know Animal Health Ireland have taken, I suppose, a very proactive approach to specific diseases. If you're looking at best practice around the world in terms of trying to tackle the breadth of different disease challenges that are there, is there something we should be doing differently in this country to try and improve the situation? And how are the resources that we need to put in place to do that?
Yeah, I think, look, I have huge respect for the work that Teagasc do, discussion groups throughout and up and down the country. And it comes back to, I suppose, communications, and I keep saying it comes back to education and awareness, that if you're able to prove to something to farmer, okay, this is the return that you'll get from embracing this tool, they'll perfectly accept it, and they'll run with it. But I think it comes back to a comms piece, and you're right. We're out and about a lot. I suppose we're trying to get our message out there of how we can and help farmers bring, MSD solutions to farmers. We're doing a summer roadshow at the event around our technology around different farms. So it's just raising that education and awareness, and ultimately, I get it. It's up to the farmer at the end of the day to make that decision on whether they embrace that tool or not. But initially, it's about sharing the information that we have on how it can improve. But I think, to sum it up, Pat, it just comes back to communications and maybe collaboration across, the different stakeholders, that we combine our message, that the message is consistent going out to farm. So maybe there's opportunity for more collaboration across the stakeholders as well.
And I suppose there have been examples of that in the past, where in earlier disease eradication programs, that multi-actor approach has been adopted with farmers with a degree of success. I
Yeah. Look, at a fine example of that is the BVD eradication scheme, Pat. And I think, that was animal health driven. The stakeholders, supported it. Farmers got behind it, and I think that's been a successful scheme, because obviously BVD has been dramatically reduced on farm. So yeah, it's picking the next disease area of what we decide, or what the industry decides to possibly eradicate. And that's a challenge in itself, but definitely the BVD would be a pin-up one for me, in the sense that the achievement out of reducing BVD on farm.
Okay, you seem to be a very strong advocate of the Nuffield program. If you're trying to sell it to some of our listeners, our viewers, for the next couple of minutes, what would you say has been the biggest advantage for you in participating in it?
Yeah, that's a tough question, Pat, to sum up in a few minutes. I could talk to you about it for an hour. Yeah, no, look at it. It's a very fulfilling experience, and I think the network was a key for me. I think I think as myself as a people person, so it was that network and meeting people. Not only the Irish network, so there's 120, or circa around 120 Nuffield scholars now in Ireland, and there's 1,700 worldwide. And a fellow Nuffield scholar gave me a good tip when he started on the journey. He says, get a map of the world and cross out the country with your kids when a person from that country visits your house. So I done it, and we coloured in the country at home. I have 3 young kids, and the boys were older at the time, 7 and 5. They're 7 and 5 now, but my family came on my Nuffield journey because they were very involved. Now, I was the one getting to travel the world. I couldn't bring them with me, but I brought my family on that journey, and they felt very involved in that journey. So it's the network. It's the opportunity. Like, when are you going to get an opportunity to visit a farm in Qatar or a farm in Pennsylvania? So it's that network. It's a very fulfilling experience. And yeah, I was incredibly positive and lucky enough to have the opportunity. And there's a real drive in it as well, as in, Nuffield people really drive things on. I suppose they're change makers. And even in Ireland, it's great to have that Nuffield network. And I've had numerous different nationalities stay in the house in recent since we got involved with Nuffield. So yeah, I couldn't speak more positively about it. A lot of people put the excuse on it, like, oh no, I'm too busy. There's never a right time to do it.
Yeah.
I do it with 3 young kids and working with MSD, but we still managed through it. So there's never a good time. So just go and put your application form in and go and do it.
And it's open to anybody involved in farming and agriculture. It's not just a program for graduates. Am I right in that?
Yeah, no. So there's a huge variation. There's farmers, there's people that work in the industry. It's open to basically, if you're involved in agriculture, you can apply basically.
Okay, so and the date that you said for the closing of applications?
Yeah, the closing date is the end of August. So if you just go onto the website, you can download your application form. If you just Google Nuffield Ireland or Nuffield Ireland, and the closing date is the end of August. So still a few weeks left.
Still a few weeks. And in terms of the application, I presume you need an idea about what your travel is about, and you need to have a bit of work done on that.
You need to go with a concept. I suppose that is part of the application process, but I actually went in with a different topic and I changed my topic because I went in with a topic around reducing antimicrobial resistance, and then I ended up on emissions because I just felt that maybe it was going to be more impactful. So yeah, you need to go with a concept, you need to go with an idea, but I suppose Nuffield also invests in the person, and the topic is maybe that you get the topic with Nuffield support as well. But yeah, it's a bonus if you go with that topic and you have that passion for that area.
Okay. Listen, we're just coming up to the end of our time, Lance. Thank you very much. I think congratulations on the study you've done and on I suppose the opportunity that has given you in terms of networking and in terms of taking a topic and becoming pretty advanced in relation to it. So thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk to us today. Next week, I think we have we're still on the topic of or I suppose a mixed topic around the greenhouse gas and a mixture of greenhouse gas and water quality, in that we're looking at the nitrates directive and anaerobic digestion and the prospects for some changes in regulation there to make a significant contribution to us pushing the anaerobic digestion industry, but also being of significant benefit to our farmers. So we're joined by Maurice Deasy next week for that. So until then, stay safe, have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Méabh.